Now, from day one, we have been at a disadvantage. Our biggest competitor has been NetSuite, right? So they have more money than God. They have more lawyers than you can think of, more engineers than us. Everything that we can think of, they are bigger. But the only advantage that we have always had is we stay super close to the customer and we ship insanely fast. I think as long as we can do both of those things, and AI only helps us do that more at scale and better, I don't think we should be spending too much time on what competition does.
Welcome to Blue Ocean by StartOps. Each episode, I sit down with leaders in consumer brand supply chain, finance, and CX to talk about the problems they're facing and the solutions they're using or building. I hope you enjoy the show. Hi, everyone. I'm Charles Cushing, the founder of StartOps. With me here today is ST, co-founder and CEO of Fulfil. Welcome, ST.
Hey, thanks for having me, Charles.
Super excited to have you here. And I think, this audience is going to be pretty familiar with Fulfil, but just for form's sake, I always start out by asking guests, what's the one-liner on Fulfil and what you guys do?
Yeah, a lot of friends in the startups community, but a one-line intro would be Fulfil's an ERP system for D2C brands. So manage everything from inventory, orders, finances, all in one ERP system for modern brands. That's pretty much it.
I think the really interesting topic that I want to spend at least half, if not most of our time on today is just the sea change that's happening in AI. I know you have a lot of thoughts on that. You guys are starting to incorporate that into your product. So maybe as a framing, I do want to start with a couple questions about the history of the company and the sort of where you're coming from in order to better understand where you're going and just sort of reflect generally on the space as well. So let's just go right back to the beginning for a minute and then we'll move our way, into the future. So yeah, it's day one at Fulfil. What were you doing right before and why did you start the company?
Ironically, it's more of the same thing. So even before Fulfil, that was 10 years ago, we started the company. Prior to Fulfil, 10 years before that, all of us co-founders were ERP consultants. We worked with a variety of different types of companies, manufacturing, governments, big ERP implementations that took years, ERP implementations that took months, variety of different stuff. That's what we did before Fulfil. And that's where we saw some of the challenges that made us want to build something like Fulfil. 10 years back, at that point of time, we were seeing a lot of Magento implementations and we would see it takes months to even just connect the ERP system to Magento and then get started. So we felt hey, some of these things, if they were out of the box, we would get more time that we could spend with customers on making the system unique to them. That was hard to do with off-the-shelf generic ERP systems. That's everything for everyone. So we thought, let's build something that's unique for D2C, and a lot has changed since then. We don't hear about Magento anymore, really, but the mission remains the same.
So just to double down on that, what did you hate the most about the existing ERPs before you started that got you fired up enough that you were I have to actually go and do this better myself?
I think the thing that frustrates the most is the amount of time it takes for an implementation. And if you look under the hood, why does it take that much time? There are a few different problems. And I think some of them are very specific to e-com, D2C space as well. So most ERP implementations across the industry takes months to implement. In D2C, those months are usually spent working with different parties. You have the vendor who sold you the ERP. Then you have somebody who's a third-party implementation consultant. Then you have 2 or 3 other products that you need to integrate with Shopify. You need another product that integrates with your 3PL. So you're effectively becoming a project manager that's managing 4 different software vendors, and it's just designed to take months to get done. So I think for us, that was the most frustrating part, because at the end of these months, we would get the system up and running and the customer would have run out of patience. They would have had employee churn. They would have had run out of money. We don't want to spend any more money on this implementation. And what they have is a system that really doesn't give them the ROI they need, because we didn't get to what the business does unique. We just got the baseline done. That baseline, in our opinion, should be out of the box. So you spend your implementation time doing the things that are unique about a D2C brand, whether that's those handwritten gift messages or that special packaging that goes in, the engraving, the personalization that you do. There's something unique about every brand. You should spend time on that, not on the basics.
That totally makes sense. And yeah, of course, the joke with ERPs is you hire the implementation consultant and they're never done because your business just keeps changing. And so they keep having stuff that they're behind on. And I think especially with omnichannel brands, people add new channels every month.
That is the way you scale, right? So change is very, very common in D2C brands, and you have to constantly evolve. Right, today morning, we are seeing that there's more changes on how shipments go from Britain to Ireland. So that has to be supported. A D2C brand has to deal with all of these changes that happen on a daily basis. You can't have things that change slow. You need to ship fast and you need to be able to do changes fast.
I know you guys have like a really interesting sort of product culture, but like even just like in the architecture of Fulfill as it's designed today, knowing that all of your customers are going to have like a lot of customizations and maybe weird stuff they need to integrate with, how have you thought about making your product robust to that and not becoming, the hated legacy provider that's always running behind on, the next thing?
I wish we could take credit for this, but I think we stole from Shopify's playbook. So if you go back to the e-com world of Magento, that was one of the big problems, right? You would have all these customizations that you would build into Magento. Comes the next release and all your extensions are broken, and then you start from scratch again. We don't hear about that anymore. Like with Shopify, it's like, hey, your plugins are all still working as long as Shopify's APIs haven't changed too much, everything continues to work. So we took that approach. So instead of letting customers customize the core of the product by learning our programming language, learning the internals of Fulfil and writing something, and then we are not able to make changes to the product because, hey, this will break all integrations. Customers are worried about the next release because their customizations would break. We didn't do any of that. And we made the entire product available on the API like Shopify has. So now you build extensions and apps on top of Fulfil. That way, as long as we don't break the API, these apps continue to work. And we take an extra amount of effort to make sure that our APIs are backwards compatible. We keep things around for 2 years, even if there's no use for them, so apps don't break. So we've taken a different approach to making sure that we can continue to move fast and not worry about breaking things. At the same time, allow customers to customize the product to meet their unique needs.
And when people are building these sort of apps on top of your APIs, is that them using your team? Is that them like plugging in their own dev team? Is it kind of up to the customer? How do you think about that?
Really depends from customer to customer. Some customers have in-house dev teams. If they do, they almost always pick up some of these customizations. Some of it is done as part of our implementation as well. We do all our implementations, like I said. So our team gets to build some of these things as well, which is also a good research playground for us. So if we see, hey, there are a bunch of customers that benefited from this, maybe this should become part of the core product. And it then ends up becoming part of the core product as well. Some customers, after say a year of the implementation, then they start thinking about how can we get more out of the platform and start building tools for unique workflows. Maybe they're doing some manufacturing and they need a super specific app that only allows the person at the floor to do one thing in different language or possible to do that. And they start then.
Another question I had for you, just to kind of like lay the table here, is like, how do you think about your persona? Because ERPs are interesting because usually finance is the primary user and it's the GL of the business. But then especially in e-commerce, you have all these other like supply chain, logistics, CX type users who are like heavy consumers of the types of data that the ERP is storing. Sometimes they need conflicting things. How do you balance this in your product philosophy?
This is where we take a different philosophy from most ERP systems. And I think this applies to most industries that are operations heavy. So D2C is definitely operations heavy. So the approach we take is when someone in the warehouse picks something or packs something, or a customer service team member is going ahead and issuing that $5 refund because to make that customer happy, they're doing things that are specific to their roles. The accounting should be behind the scenes and should happen automatically. So the journal entries that are getting created should happen behind the scenes. The finance team should be able to set these things up ahead of time. So they should be able to say, hey, when inventory is lost for this reason, this is the GL I want to book. When refunds are issued for this specific purpose, this is where I want to book. So these teams can continue to do their jobs. The customer service team, the warehouses, they can continue to do their operations without worrying about the accounting complexity. And the finance teams are happy because even at the scale of tens of thousands of orders going out of the door, you still get clean books because all of that accounting and bookkeeping is automated. They don't have to sit at the end of the month and export reports and then figure out what to allocate where, which GL goes where. You don't need any of that. That's how we bridge that gap. And that makes operations drive accounting, but the way the finance team set it up.
Do you want customers to be able to use Fulfil as the main interface for everything? Or are you happy to sort of like play nice with other apps in the ecosystem?
So our core thesis is the system of truth when it comes to inventory and accounting should be fulfilled. But it's very common for merchants to have a surrounding apps that they're using. And given we have an open API and data warehouse, it's not uncommon to see a bunch of things that are built on top of that as extensions on top of Fulfil for these purposes. But the core of it should be one integrated, one source of truth for inventory and the same source of truth for accounting. When you separate them, you start having issues. Like the basis of that is if you want to have good accounting, you need to have good COGS. If you need to have good COGS, you need to be able to track whenever inventory comes in, at what cost it came in and what cost it went out. So if you're not able to track that real time, which is exactly what an inventory management system does, you can't have good COGS. If you don't have good COGS, your accounting is a guess at that point. So that's what makes it really hard to decouple these two. So, and especially at scale, and once you have different channels of business and different ways of buying things and different landed costs. So as the complexity increases, it becomes harder and harder to decouple these two things.
So you kind of don't mind what interface the user is using as long as the final sort of resting place for the data or the source of truth is with you guys.
Yeah, in the long term, I'm not even sure people will be using the Fulfil UI for things outside of, say, you're operating in a warehouse, you're probably using our WMS to operate, you're recording things in there. But I see a future where people are going to be using some interface like Claude or ChatGPT and you're interacting with Fulfil behind the scenes. I think chat and a chat-like interface or a voice-like interface is the future of most enterprise software, and I don't think Fulfil will be any different.
If there's like a fairly complex mid-market e-commerce or omnichannel brand today who's not using Fulfil, who you think should be right there, like on your prospect list, why is that? Is it inertia? Is it some part of the feature set that like you guys haven't prioritized? Is it something else? Like just out of curiosity, because to me, it seems like, there aren't that many ERPs sort of waving a flag saying specifically like we are for you. So I'd just be curious like how you view that challenge.
Quite frankly, I think the biggest reason that we see out there is buyer's remorse with something like NetSuite. They've spent years implementing it and have spent so much money on it and are locked into a really long contract. Till that renewal comes up and NetSuite decided to jack up the price by 3x. That company will continue to use these systems. And the impetus to change is usually when the subscription just triples and you're like, was not getting any value to begin with, and now I'm paying 3x for the same thing. That's when the motivation comes into switch. Otherwise, everyone's like really, really burnt by their previous implementations, the amount of effort and time and energy that went into it.
So it's basically lock in, and have they gotten far enough into the lock-in cycle that they're ready to like make it their top priority to rip and replace NetSuite?
Oh yeah, like for example, right now it's what? We're just getting into Q2 2025. We are already working with brands that have their renewals coming in 2026 and they want to switch by then. So that's how far they're thinking just because of how brutal their previous implementation was.
This is a great overview. Thank you of where you guys are coming from. And I do want to talk about like the software landscape and how you see that evolving. The software landscape is maybe in some ways evolving in reaction to what the shippers in the market are doing, the merchants in the market are doing. And you guys have like a pretty interesting bird's eye view of what those merchants are doing or changing. Based on your customer base today, like what are you seeing are the major changes that, one of your customers might be experiencing just in the last like year or two with the advent of AI and also just like the changing sort of economic trends?
I think the change of economic trends was something that was very, very visible to us. If growth at all costs and adding, which translates in our world to, hey, we need to add more channels, we need to add more ways to ship faster. That was the goal. That changed quite a bit over the past couple of years. And we are seeing a big focus on running profitable businesses. There's a big focus on margins, contribution margins, what's the profitability by SKU. So that focus has changed quite a bit. And we're seeing brands that never did, for example, wholesale before. So there's been a shift over the past couple of years to diversify, make sure that things are more profitable, and definitely a focus on the underlying financials. I'd say that was not as much of a focus for many brands, but that has suddenly shifted. Boards are asking for more details. Lenders are asking have tightened up the information they want to see when they're lending. They want clean AR. They want to see cured inventory numbers. Everyone's reviewing, how did you come up with these cost numbers? So there's a lot more scrutiny into the numbers that has led to more focus on profitability and margins. That's been a big shift over the past 2 years.
And how about just in terms of like how the impact of AI is trickling down to brands at this point? Like, how are you seeing that manifest?
I think there's a lot more AI being used by brands today on the marketing side of things and less so on the operations and other back office aspects of the business. But I think there's a lot more potential there. For example, our implementations now, we're using so much AI in there to even uncover things that don't come up typically on sales cycle, uncover details of the business, analyzing the data that comes in from brands when they, as part of data migration, hey, this queue seems to be having an issue there. So there's a lot more efficiency that you can gain by using AI even in the back office. It's not just about, the typical use cases like, hey, how do you use AI for forecasting? That's a well-solved problem and has been for a while, but it's the other aspects which were hard to do. For example, this is an interesting use case that came up and we're shipping that in the next release. One of the most annoying parts about DTC is when a customer places an order, it receives an order confirmation email, and they want to go right back into the site and update their address. Once they update this address, there are, if you're on Shopify, there's one problem that your sales tax is not recalculated, and sometimes you need to completely recalculate sales tax because it's a very different address and that destination doesn't have the same taxes. But in some cases, this has already gone to the 3PL. Do you have to call up the 3PL? So this adds workload for the customer service teams as well. We're starting to use AI there as an example. So this can save customer service teams some time. If the address change is small, someone just went in and updated it, put a number sign before their unit number, or changed from unit to suite just because this is a small change. So those kind of small changes, typo fixes, all of those changes, our AI can now analyze and the agent says, okay, this is fine. You don't need a human to review this. And in other cases where it looks like, oh, this is big enough change that I think a human should review this before this goes out, we put a shipment on hold and flag it to the user. So that's an example of something that is hard for ops and it takes human time, but can be easily automated by AI. There's so much of this that can be done. And I think there's a lot more we could be doing there.
You started talking about this earlier, just like you think, in the future, like the interface might just be, they're talking to Claude, but plugging into your data set. Like, do you have a clearer idea than that you're sort of building towards right now? Or like, how does this affect your sort of roadmap for the next year or two?
When we started incorporating AI into the product, the first parts that we picked up were things that were more challenging for merchants. For example, we have a custom reporting that we allow on the platform, and the basic stuff you can usually just put a table together, dragging columns here and there. It's a pivot table that you're building, right? So easy to do that. But when things get a little bit more complex, like for example, you want to see what products are sold together to this state and so on, that kind of analysis typically requires somebody who brands would call a data person. A data person can be someone who knows how to use SQL well and is able to build these reports. So effectively, you try and understand what the business wants, and then you try and translate that into SQL, which is a language that's used for building most of these reports, and then you present them. First stab that we took at AI was to take the English business requirements and translate them into SQL with AI. And it did a fantastic job, and it continues to get better with every release, not because we are doing something special, but the underlying LLM models are becoming so much better every week that the results of those queries are how they're written and the number of chat messages it takes before it gets to the perfect query just keeps coming out. So that's getting so much better. So that was the first set of things that we took a stab at, and definitely all the complex aspects for which businesses would have need to hire someone else, that would change. Now, outside of Fulfil too, we are seeing this happen. Like last week, I was talking to one of the CEOs of a 8-figure brand. The CEO is building an app for the company on this thing called Replit. So the question that came in was, hey, how do we get a Fulfil API working with Replit? So we jumped right in because this is exciting stuff. And imagine that's an AI tool that allows you to build visual interfaces and apps and interface with APIs and so on. Don't worry about deployment. Don't worry about the security aspects of it. That takes away a lot of those things away. So when CEOs are able to build those kind of apps for their teams, that's a huge, huge change, because what takes multiple steps for their business now suddenly becomes, hey, one click for someone or an easy click of a picture that suddenly translates into data somewhere else. It streamlines those ops a lot. So that's one aspect of where we think AI will change things. For me, the fun use cases are a little bit different. Like when you save something, usually you have to write a title and name. Even if it's a custom report that you're writing, usually you have to name the report and the description. And over a period, the name of the report stays the same, but what it actually does changes. And this is something that we see with merchants who have been with us for years, that automation rules used to mean something and has been updated over the years, but the name or description has not kept up. So naming things and descriptions, AI does a fantastic job of summarizing exactly what it does into this super short sentence. Those are kind of other user interface use cases that we have brought in, and it's a game changer. Like, I really love what it does. It makes the system a lot more maintainable for our admins.
Are you actively building towards a future where it's just this like abstracted text interface and you just type in the business requirements and that's it? Or like, are you starting to think about deprecating any of the visual interfaces that you have? Or is this like, it's more of an incremental thing like, hey, when it comes up, we'll think about that problem in isolation?
What's available on the UI today is like a chat copilot, which I think almost every major app has rolled out. Like, I think Shopify calls it the sidekick and so on. So we have the exact same thing. But what we are working towards is the entire Fulfil API abstracted behind something called an MCP. And the MCP is what interfaces with Claude. Today, Claude, it's only available on the desktop version. It's not really available on. So there's a little bit more to go before it becomes easy for everyday users to just connect Fulfil to their chat GPT or connect Fulfil to their online Claude account. Today, it still requires getting an API key and then setting up Claude desktop for it. But I can see that it's a far better way to operate. You're able to bring in a sales order PDF and say, hey, create this as an order and Fulfil, or ask about the status of a specific order. And it's able to figure out which APIs to call and get it to a certain level of accuracy. I think the models are already there. It still makes a bunch of mistakes and so on. But I think it becomes more useful is when this MCP gets rolled out to the online versions of ChatGPT and Claude, where everybody can just connect the app and just start using.
As this market shifts, is there any change in like who you view as your competition? Like today, it's that legacy NetSuite, implementation that's keeping your would-be customer locked in. Do you think they're going to keep up, or like, does it actually become someone else that you're competing with? Is it just the base level models themselves that can do a good enough job vacuuming up data from everything to just assemble, what you've built? Like, how do you view that?
One thing that hasn't changed is how we view competition from day one. I think it's very easy for companies to obsess about what competition's doing and then copy that and compete in marketing with what they're doing and so on. Now, from day one, we have been at a disadvantage. Our biggest competitor has been NetSuite, right? So they have more money than God. They have more lawyers than you can think of, more engineers than us. Everything that we can think of, they are bigger. But the only advantage that we have always had is we stay super close to the customer and we ship insanely fast. I think as long as we can do both of those things, and AI only helps us do that more at scale and better, I don't think we should be spending too much time on what competition does. We take a lot of inspiration from how all enterprise AI tools are developing, how these chat models are. We keep that close pulse on it. And we also spend time with our customers, encouraging them also to use a bunch of these AI things. And then they say, hey, I wish Fulfil did this. We are able to iterate on it pretty fast. And as long as we are able to do that, I don't think we should worry as much about.
One final question here. I want to pull it back to this amazing position that you're in, just to be like so deeply embedded in and familiar with the operations of so many amazing brands. Are there any like lessons you can share? Like, you see what everyone's doing, but like, what are the top 1% brands doing differently from everyone else? In terms of like best practices, in terms of tools they're using, in terms of stuff they're doing with AI, like anything's fair game, but what can the rest of the world learn from the people you see doing a really great job, just like as operators and as brands?
I'd say one of the things that I've seen brands that scale to really well. Now, this could be someone from either the founding team or the leadership team that is very close to ops. So it's not something that's been handed off. Hey, this is not my thing. They completely understand how their business works. Like, how does that 3PL pick, pack, and ship? Someone from the leadership. It doesn't have to be the CEO. Like, if you're a marketing focused CEO, that might not be a thing. But there's someone in the leadership team who is really, really close. And between the leadership, all of the different aspects of the business, and if they all know how to do any of those jobs, then the execution of that team is very different from another company, another brand in the same space. There's this founder I was talking to once, and she described herself as, 9-figure brand. And she's like, I can do any of the jobs anybody in this building does. And that's a superpower. Then you are able to like dive straight into, that process you have, it's not worth continuing anymore. That came from a different period of time. When you don't have that level of understanding, some parts of the business lag behind others. So I think the well-run brands that I see have founders, somebody from the leadership team actively involved in all aspects of the business, and they understand the business really, really well.
Just like two random stories to share that triggered thinking about this. One is like my own experience running a warehouse. I was always struggling to figure out like, why are we missing numbers? Like, what's going on? Are we actually performing, the way we should be? And then one week my ops manager was out sick and I just had to go in and like do the role. And it was the best thing that happened. My instincts were correct, but I didn't have the authority to actually be able to go and say, oh no, like actually when you put a garment on the mannequin, like you should be doing it like this, not like this. The other thing that echoes at a broader level is just within startups, like one of the most common refrains is when an operator is frustrated, it's often because their S&OP process is broken. And that is often because someone, usually the CEO, isn't taking it seriously or isn't like setting the guideposts there or is letting, the marketing team, not to name names here, but yes, the marketing team, not take it as seriously as they should be in terms of like, hey, we actually have to like cut a PO and have these physical items arrive at certain places in order for you to, do what you want to do. And so, yeah, that super resonates.
For brands that operate their own warehouse, one of the conversations I have with them before they start their Black Friday, Cyber Mondays, marketing, please coordinate what your promotions are going to be for PFCM. If you're going to roll out bundles, that means a completely different thing for the ops and the warehouse. So communicate it. Then that breaks down to same kind of problems that you described.
Do you have anything specifically around like S&OP built into the product? Because that feels like it could be a cool angle.
I don't think we have. Yeah, probably the next thing for me to study about and see how we can incorporate more into the product.
Yeah. If you need some operators to talk to, then hit me
100%.
up. We definitely got some folks who will have thoughts on that. Awesome. Well, this has been great. Thank you so much. Super interesting food for thought here. And thanks everyone for listening. If you want to learn more about Fulfil, we'll link them in the show notes. We've got a verified page for them on the StartOps directory, and catch you next episode. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Blue Ocean. Blue Ocean is produced by StartOps, a growing collection of resources for operations leaders at e-commerce brands. A few of the things we've built include a growing, vendor-free Slack community for operators to ask their most important questions and get answers from trusted peers, a job board that curates jobs from 1,500 modern brands, a media hub that includes this podcast, as well as articles and templates on a variety of operations topics, and a comprehensive directory of the software and services used by our community members. If you want to learn more, head to startops.network. And to keep up with the latest information from StartOps, or catch the most recent episodes of Blue Ocean, follow the StartOps page on LinkedIn or subscribe to our newsletter. Thanks for listening and hope to catch you next episode.